And this event brought into focus once again the role of the Indian diaspora, their growing political clout, their economic status, their contribution to the US society, and how the government of India is looking to leverage their position and their influence to further India's cause, how the US also looks at them as an increasingly stronger community force, as an increasingly louder political voice, and how Donald Trump would want to leverage this in an election year for himself. And with me in the studio today are two very prominent members of the Indian American community here. We have Jagdish, Sewhani, president of the America-India Public Affairs Committee, joining us from the Voice of America studio. And we have Dr. Dinesh Sharma with us. He is a professor at City University of New York. Good morning and thank you both.
Good morning, Palki ji. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. We saw what happened in Houston yesterday, and the images were electrifying. There was the statements, of course, were very significant, but so were the optics. How did you see what happened there? This was 3 times as big as the Madison Square Garden event.
So, and I was there at the MSG event 4 years ago. So that was his introduction to New York. So in Texas, obviously, as you pointed out, it seemed like a rally for Mr. Trump, whose approval rating is quite low for incumbent president, and his foreign policy achievements, have been somewhat challenged. Whether it's Iran, North Korea, there is no big deal that he's been able to shore in as yet. So he needed Mr. Modi, I think, more than Mr. Modi needed him. Although we'll get into that a little bit in terms of the Kashmir issue. At the UN meeting, that Prime Minister Modi will be hit with some charges on 370 at the UN meeting, and so I think they both needed each other, if
right.
In geopolitical terms.
I was going through the newspapers here, and the New York Times, we know, is not very charitable when it comes to Narendra Modi and India. They tend to give a certain spin to it, but the New York Times front page picture was that of Narendra Modi and Donald Trump holding hands, and they had a half-page story, a multi-column story, where I would say grudgingly they also said that this was an event for the Indian Prime Minister, and the people had gathered there to listen to Narendra Modi, and there was at best, quote-unquote, polite applause for Donald Trump, is how they put it. Is that how you see it?
I see, let's forget about New York Times. They have, like you rightly said, they have always been anti-India. Whatever India or Narendra Modi does, they don't look at anything positive. So we'll just ignore New York Times. But the pictures we saw yesterday, they were electrifying. It was not a polite response. It was humongous response to Trump and Prime Minister Modi. And it is very important not only for Trump or Modi, it is good for US and India. The relationship between both the countries are very, very important. And now we see Mr. Trump, the President of the United States, a true friend of India, which perhaps we never had in last 50 years. If you see the history of
How is he a true friend of India?
See, let's start with terrorism. He is hardcore anti against radical Islamic terrorism. And India is facing a threat from our neighboring country, and I would name it, though Prime Minister Modi didn't say Pakistan, but Pakistan is an epicenter of terrorism. Their foreign policy depends on this terrorism. Just imagine United States and India come together against this radical Islamic terrorism. We will achieve a lot. Then we can focus on economics. So he is good for India against anti-terrorism. And if India wants to achieve this 5 trillion economy, we need America with us. It's a huge market for India. The bilateral trade between US and India has to improve to $100 billion from what here is. And we can do it with the support of Trump and Modi.
Your optimism is very encouraging, but I'm a journalist.
I would say I'm a realistic.
And I have a fair bit of cynicism in the way I look at things. So yes, India and the US coming together on terrorism would be great, but Pakistan still remains America's ally. Pakistan is still a a country that the US relies on. Donald Trump has raised Kashmir in the past few weeks. As Indian Americans, how do you see this? Do you see this as one more indication that he is a transactional president, that he will say what must be said at a particular time, but then again do what serves his and his national interest the best?
Yeah, so I think broadly speaking, the 50 years reference is good. 70 years reference, going back to India's independence and all of that is also relevant here in the sense that we're at the UN, founded 70 years ago, right? And Indians were very much instrumental in the drafting of the UN Charter. So we have to be mindful of human rights. We have to be mindful when we talk about big geopolitical business. We have to be mindful of fair growth, right? That the middle class is expanding, 300 million people. I think reference was made to that yesterday. But obviously, the lower middle class, the working class, the farmers have to be included in the growth, the trickle-down growth, right? So we have to be inclusive about the growth. We have to be mindful of the human rights issues. Yes, we need an ally in terms of security. In the United States, the policy hasn't changed. Started with the Clintons, Bushes, Obama. So everybody, generally speaking, is anti-terror post 9/11. All presidents have been anti-terror post 9/11. So I'm not sure if that's necessarily a big strategic move on the part of the White House currently. So clearly they both needed each other transactionally. And I think historically, India is in the right trend in terms of being against terrorism. There's no doubt about that, right? But the question is, will India also defend civil rights and liberties and free press around the world, not just in India, but around the world, right? If India is going to be a leader in the Asia-Pacific region, India has to defend the rights of every group that's trying to fight for greater voice in the public square.
Can I add just here one thing? I don't know from where he's getting this connotation that there is about human rights and our freedom of press. The freedom of press I have seen in India, I have never seen anywhere in the world. I was there even 2 weeks back. The way they used to bash India, if they do it in another country, perhaps they'll be behind the bars. But we are very liberal and very open. There is total freedom of press in India. And at this junction, this is what diplomacy is all about. We need America and America needs us. It's a two-way traffic. India is the biggest market as on today. We are talking about 1.3 billion people. So it is good for America to have a good relationship with India, and it is good for India to have America on our side at this junction in the history.
I think, and when you say that taking leadership on global issues, I think that's what this government is trying to do. So while in the press, most people tend to be obsessed with the India-Pakistan equation, the indication from the government is very clear that this Prime Minister wants to touch upon issues which affect the whole world, which is why he's talking about climate change first up. He's talking about Modi, he's talking about Mahatma Gandhi, he's talking about peace. Whereas if you look at the statements from the Pakistani leadership over the past 6 years, they're only about Kashmir. But from Sushma Swaraj to Narendra Modi to others, if you look at the statements made by the Indian representatives, they touch upon very many issues as far as global leadership is concerned. But coming back to how they benefit, you keep saying that they both benefit from this equation. Only 14% Indian Americans, as I understand it, voted for Trump in 2016. Do you believe that post yesterday's event and that very obvious and open endorsement by the Indian Prime Minister for the US President, that figure is going to go up?
Yeah, I'm not saying the Indian press is somehow not open enough or free enough. I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm just saying that for India to be even more free and open, it's a good thing for Prime Minister Modi to come here and speak of values of multilingualism, as he did in the speech. Multiracial, unity in diversity, which is our theme, has been for 70 years, right? We have to keep those values intact, even though, as most political scientists today would say, India is turning more majoritarian, and minority rights are somewhat under duress. That's putting it mildly. So New York Times, we can say, ignore the New York Times. I don't think it's easy to simply ignore the New York Times and their editorial page, which slams Modi every time he's here.
Yes, they also said 9/11 was an aeroplane attack.
Right. So yes, so we're living in,
putting it a bit too mildly.
and we're still living in the shadow of 9/11. Just a few miles from here. So, and I was here when that happened, so I'm aware of the dark shadow it has cast on American foreign policy. and President Trump is benefiting from that. And so that's why that rally was seen the way it was seen. But I don't know how many of those 50,000 Indian Americans are actually going to vote for, which way are they going to vote? It's not clear yet. I mean, we'll see in the next election. But I think to your point, I would say it's good that Prime Minister Modi is here. It's good that we had a huge rally there yesterday. And it's good for Indian Americans overall, for business. We just have to be mindful of the fact that we also represent, the land of largest democracy.